This podcast was produced by OAR Dunedin with support from New Zealand On Air.
Welcome to Disabled Persons Assembly's Notable Radio Show. DPA is a systemic advocacy organisation run by and for disabled people. DPA is a pan-impaired organisation with members across the country. Over the next half hour, we'll discover how we can work collaboratively to achieve inclusion for all New Zealanders. DPA's Notable Radio Show, a whole new attitude.
Welcome to DPA's Notable Radio. On today's show, we're going to be talking a bit about what DPA has been busy doing over the last year. So we're just chatting about the local work that we have been focused on in Ōtepoti, Dunedin. I'm often asked what exactly my job entails, so I'm here to tell you a bit about that. First, some introductions of our local team. So our Dunedin team consists of me, Amy Taylor. My role is Kaituitui Ōtepoti, or the Dunedin Community Connector. And then we have Chris Ford, who most of you are familiar with because Chris used to host this show. And he used to be the local Kaituitui, but now Chris has moved on to being our South Island policy advisor. And our last member of our local team is Miriam O'Connor. And Miriam, if you receive our newsletter, you'll be familiar with her being our editor. So she edits our newsletter, and we have a newsletter that comes out either once a month or once every 2 months, depending on how much is going on. And our team all report back to our head office, which is led by Mojo Mathers, who is the DPA, or Disabled Persons Assembly CEO. So in the past year, our team has been involved in various initiatives, chiefly aimed at uplifting the disabled community at a local but systemic level. So we're not an individual advocacy organisation, and it's really important that people understand this. So if you ring me up and you say, "Oh, my doctor gaslit me," I'm sorry, I can't help you with that particular scenario, but I can say that we have had a number of phone calls relating to the fact that GPs tend to gaslight disabled patients. So we collect that information, and when Chris, who is our policy advisor, writes submissions to change policy, he takes that information and for instance, he's now writing a policy about how GPs treat disabled patients. And he has that information that, in our experience as DPA, our member feedback says that gaslighting is an issue. So he can add that to his submission. And then when the government is doing policy changes, they take those submissions into account when they change the law. So that is how we make change for disabled people on a systemic level. It does mean that we often get requests for what we call individual advocacy, which is basically you're asking me to go to your GP and say, "Don't gaslight disabled people." I can't do that. That is not part of my job. We're a systemic advocacy organisation. So the initiatives that we have ongoing for this last year include things like having forums on topics of relevance for the disabled community. So we've had a forum, or 2 forums, on civil defence. We've had fire safety. We've had a forum on housing for the disabled community, and the local body elections. So other things that we've been up to is working with the Otago Museum to increase accessibility at this facility to make sure that local disabled people can have an equal experience when they visit the museum to everybody else who visits. We've also been working with Kāinga Ora to bring some more awareness to the need for accessible housing and what accessible housing and universal design actually means. And we'll talk a bit about that in a minute. We've worked with the Access for All team. So Access for All is a small number of DPOs, disabled persons organisations, who get together and we discuss with the DCC, the Dunedin City Council, and the ORC, the Otago Regional Council, we discuss topical issues and bring feedback from the disabled community to these organisations. So when they're making changes, they know how the disabled community feels. And Access for All is led by John Marable from Living Well Disability Resource Centre. And John was heavily involved in the New South Dunedin Library build and design. And I went along and I did an assessment of the accessibility, and I'll tell you a bit about that in a minute as well. Well, we've also had a look at the new electric buses. The bus system in Dunedin is run by the Otago Regional Council, and working with the Otago Regional Council to make sure our buses are accessible for everyone. So Chris's job, as I've said before, is to write submissions both to local and central government addressing equity issues for the disabled community on upcoming policy. And I'm not going to focus too much on what Chris does today, because I would really like to drag Chris into the studio and actually have him tell us a bit about his work over the last year. And I think that I would really like to do this to show you what an impact being a member of DPA you can actually bring. So we listen to our member feedback, and that all feeds into our submissions for systemic change. And if you would like to become a member of DPA, it is free for individuals, and you can join up on our brand new website, and our website is dpa.org.nz. So let me tell you a little about the forums that we have hosted this year. So our forums are funded by the Dunedin City Council, and we've hosted civil defence forums. So somebody we work pretty closely with is Paul Allen, and Paul Allen works with the civil defence team, and he came along to our civil defence forum to teach local disabled people about what civil defence is and how we can be prepared for an emergency. Emergency preparedness is incredibly important for disabled people because we experience barriers during emergencies that other people don't necessarily experience. So what can these barriers be? Say, for instance, that you are deaf. You might not be able to access the reminders, all the communication that comes through from the government and from the civil defence teams during a civil defence emergency. So that creates a barrier to your civil defence response. Or if you're a wheelchair user, say you're a power chair user, you depend on electricity, which is not always available during an emergency. Maybe you depend on electricity for even more essential things than mobility, for breathing, for instance. So you're in a very difficult position during a civil defence emergency. So disabled people experience more barriers during emergencies, and they also, very unfortunately, are more likely to fall victim to civil defence emergencies than the general population. So this is why teaching disabled people about how to be prepared during a civil defence emergency is so important, and that's what Paul Allen came to talk to us about during our forum. And he's an incredibly eloquent speaker, and he is also very down-to-earth and very caring person. And I think we all felt that we could share some of the barriers that we consider that we have during a civil defence emergency with Paul. And that was just such a wonderful thing. And one of the biggest barriers people spoke to us about was the cost of being emergency prepared. So there's a whole list of things that civil defence recommends that you have in your home to keep you prepared for an emergency. These things include things like torch, face mask, extra food, large quantities of bottled water, and the list goes on. And if you are a disabled person, you are more likely to be living below the poverty line, which means that you don't have extra money for just in cases. And that is something that Disabled Persons Assembly, DPA, learnt from our forums and learnt about our community. And so we are now talking about how we can assist with this. Fire safety. So we had this wonderful representative from FENS, Nick Linton. Nick Linton is actually a deaf man. He has cochlear implant, and he came to talk to our disabled community about how we can stay safe during fires and evacuation from fires, and he talked to us all about keeping our home fire safe to reduce the risk of fires. And I think we all learned a lot, because I think that we think we know, but actually the reality is for disabled people, especially those with mobility limitations, or perhaps if you're blind, it can be take you very much longer than a typical person to evacuate. And having a good, solid fire safety plan will reduce your risk during a fire emergency. So that was also incredibly informative. And then we had a housing forum. I unfortunately missed the housing forum because I had pneumonia. I do not recommend. Do not get pneumonia. But yes, I was very ill. But Mojo, our CEO, stepped in and drove all the way from South Canterbury to come and assist with the housing forum. And we had a number of speakers, so we had a panel-like setup talking about housing for disabled people. Now, as many of you will know, housing is a huge barrier and a huge issue for the disabled community, because accessible housing is extremely rare. And so we learnt about different pathways to access accessible housing. We learnt about who the different housing providers were, and how you get to be on wait lists for rental housing from housing providers. So there's a lot to learn in this, as housing as a topic. And there's a lot that the housing providers can learn from the disabled community as well. This is a two-way street. It's not just us learning, it's them learning as well about what the different needs of the disabled community was. So that was hugely beneficial as well. Then Chris Ford organised a forum on the local election. I was actually running in the local election, so I couldn't be directly involved in organising this forum. But it was a mayoral forum, so we only had mayoral candidates come speak, because there was just so many candidates in this local election. And we learnt about what all the local mayoral candidates stood for, and how they aimed to uplift the disabled community. So that was also an incredibly informative forum session. Now let's talk about the South Dunedin Library Complex. So that's called Te Whataora Kantuna. And this complex is just, I don't know whether any of you have been, it's just amazing. It's a lovely complex. And so much thought has been put into access in this facility, and I think a lot of that is thanks to John Marrable from Living Well Disability Services. He's been just phenomenal in pushing for a truly accessible library site, which is particularly important in South Dunedin, where we know that we have an aging population, but we also have a younger disabled community living in South Dunedin. So I went along and I took my two wee ones along. So it was really to try and just have an experience about what it would be like as a wheelchair user visiting the library. And physical access to the library is just amazing. There are automatic doors, wide aisles, low tables, and very clear signage as to where everything is. The toilets are unisex and accessible, and they are well equipped. Their tiny minor issues they were very aware of, and they were aiming to fix them. So it's not only important that we advocate for accessibility, but we also advocate for flexibility in that people are prepared to actually make changes to improve things. And this was also very clear that the head librarian, Amanda Corrigan, was actually also completely on board with making changes to improve accessibility in the library. The signage was clear and high contrast. There's tactile signing, but actually only on the lifts at the moment, but they aim to have very large keyboards for the blind community. This was also being set up. The children's area was a very relaxed and welcoming space with lots of bean bags. So really, the only issue that we could identify from a disability point of view with the new South Dunedin Library setup was parking and street access. There are only 2 mobility parks 2 blocks away from the front of the building, and these are only 30-minute parks without any curb cuts. At the back of the building, there are more 30-minute parks, but none of them are mobility parks. There is a DCC car park across the road, but there is no pedestrian crossing to access the library. So these are concerns that I will be bringing forward at the Access for All meetings for the council to address over the coming year. The other project that I've had over the last year is to work with the Otago Museum Turua to actually increase accessibility at the museum. So recently I met with the museum director, Ian Griffin, and the head of finance, Anne Bridger, and we've discussed their recent improvements. They have actually made a huge effort to increase the accessibility of the shop area, and so they've removed a lot of stock to make it more accessible. Previously, this little shop was so jammed full of stock, it was pretty much impossible for a wheelchair user to move around. The other issue was that they had very cluttered front countertops, so it was impossible for a wheelchair user to actually reach the FPOS machines to pay. That's all been improved upon, and it looks wonderful. So a big thank you to Anne, especially, who has been a big driver in making sure that the shop area is more accessible. We've also discussed the recent jewellery exhibition, which has been an ongoing point of communication between DPA and the museum, because this was held in an inaccessible space with so not accessible to wheelchair users, and it offered no access features for the blind or low vision community. So we've been in conversation with Ian Griffin over this, and he has noted that this was a mistake and that the museum will learn from how this exhibit was set up, that we need to improve access at future museum exhibits. The other great thing that the museum has recently done is to repaint the mobility parking spots at the museum entrance to clearly mark out these spaces as reserved for mobility permit holders. And this was an issue because the painting had completely faded away, and it looked like there was no access for mobility permit holders, but that was not the case. So, and the last couple of things I want to talk to you about that we've been busy with in the last year is bus accessibility. So we've been meeting with the ORC every month or 2 months as DPA to discuss some things that the ORC has been doing and the disability requirements on these things. And one of these is a movement towards fully electric buses. So these new buses are designed slightly differently in terms of where the seating is and things like that. And so I had a fun time just a week or two ago as the ORC invited me to be part of their photo shoot, and at the same time I got the opportunity with some other adults around, so I wasn't feeling so vulnerable actually being on a bus where I wasn't quite sure of the accessibility, to have a try on the accessibility features of these new buses. And the wheelchair accessibility of the new buses is actually just fab. It's really good. I experienced no issues getting on the bus. The driver does have to lower the ramp. I would always prefer to be able to be more independent from the driver, but beyond the driver having to lower the ramp, I could get on the bus without any particular issue. The only thing that I would suggest is they had some kind of anchorage or seatbelt system for wheelchair users, because even with the brakes on, I was moving around in the bus, which is not ideal. So that was something that I did. I also went on the little Mosgiel on-demand bus, and that was really quite fun as well. I took the kids, and I was alone, so that was interesting, but we did manage. The issues there are more around how many stops there are and how close they actually are to people's homes. So I've chatted about what we've been up to this year, but it's time to bring the show to a close. Thank you very much for listening. I will hope to drag Chris along to the next show, and we can actually talk a little bit more about what he's been doing from a policy point of view. Thank you very much for listening. This has been DPA's Notable Radio. Thank you.
Disabled Persons Assembly is Aotearoa, New Zealand's first pan-disability national organisation, providing system-level advocacy for all disabled people. Membership is free for individuals. If you'd like to know more, visit our national website at www.dpa.org.nz or contact your local Kaituitui or Community Connector, Amy Taylor, at kaituitui.ōtepoti@dpa.org.nz. Disabled Persons Assembly, a whole new attitude.
This podcast was produced by OAR FM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On the Air.